Hello, welcome to the Ahead of the Game podcast. Today we'll be discussing which guard in the draft is the best fit next to the San Antonio Spurs superstar Victor Wembanyama. I'm your host, James Oxford. Our panelists today are Alex West, Chris Filer, and special guest panelist Evan Townsend. First, let's get some background on where the Spurs are currently. So I'll start with you, Alex. What have the Spurs done so far to explore Wembanyama's game through his first NBA season?
Yeah, I think it's one of those questions where when you have a mold breaker or a unicorn or whatever you want to call him, it's how much do you shape him to the system and how much do you shape the system around him. And I think the Spurs have done a pretty incredible job putting together a system that lets him experiment and get comfortable where he is on the floor. And one of those things that they've done really well is just let him go back to the basket, which is not something you see a ton of anywhere in the league. You know, we see a little more of it with Jokic, but it's kind of an old school mentality. And between the back to the basket stuff, the kind of old school traditional center, and then the above the break threes, you have this really unique player that is a lot different than it's not going to be a guy you're going to want to run 40 screen and rolls with over the course of the game. He can do it. He certainly has the hands and the athleticism and the reach and all those things to do it, but that's not really where he's gotten comfortable in his first year. And so I think the big question, and it is important to frame it this way, is to ask, what are the Spurs looking for in regards to a point guard? Trey Jones has been pretty impressive. If you look at the on-off numbers, the two-man on-off numbers, you see Trey Jones and Wembanyama up there in the top. I think they're at like plus 2.7 for the year, which is, all things considered for a team as bad as they are, not too bad. And then, of course, the Sohan experiment crashed and burned really early on, playing him at point guard. And so it feels like the Spurs really took this year to experiment, to kind of understand what they wanted to do with him. And that leads into this draft, which is really interesting because I think you've got a lot of different prospects that go a lot of different directions in terms of what their skill set is. And so I think as we get closer to the draft, it just becomes like, well, what is the fit here? And so that's what I guess we were going to discuss today.
Awesome, thanks. And Evan, do you have anything you kind of want to add to that?
Oh no, that was great. An amazing take, by the way. When it comes down to Wemby, we've never seen a prospect like this. And when it comes down to the Spurs, they've kind of run, I don't want to call it a boring offense per se, but it's the Spurs offense. It's always been the same. It's pass and screen away. It's a motion circle offense. You always find your cutters. You always get a high screen and roll, pick and roll, pick and pops. A lot of they pretty much test the abilities and stretch the abilities to each player to get the best out of them, and they really push and test them. And with Wemby, it's just like, all right, we're gonna throw 150 more alley-oops than we did last season. One, all right. Two, we have to figure out where he feels comfortable in the motion of the offense and defense. I didn't expect them to throw out him playing nail defense and him being a defense player of the year candidate with not a lot of help around him per se, and then focusing on him playing zone defense to start off his career, which is just wild. But to get back to the offense and exciting things, this year he's exceeded expectations throughout many people's just vision and mindsets. But when you think about it, nobody could assumed that he would shoot 40% and increase his number throughout the season off of in motion off the dribble threes. 40% compared to catch and shoot, which is floating around 27, 28 the whole year. That doesn't really fit with the Spurs offense per se. They always are where the guys to pass the screen away, wait until you get the best shot, and find a guy that can knock down a grenade. The shot that with the 2 seconds left on the shot clock, right? Wemby's throwing up 35, 40 footers from the logo to start off the game to get himself going. That's what the best of the best do. That's what Caitlin Clark does. She starts off the game with a long distance three to set it off. Just let them know, like, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling. This is what we're doing, and this just to get a feel for the game. And Wemby has the green light. He's showing that he can be a leader in the locker room. He's showing that he can be not just the first option, but he can be the guaranteed counted on guy at any point in time. And when you think about it, the Spurs have struggled getting the ball late in games. That's been like the thing a lot of Spurs fans have been harping in on. But just wait until they have a better surrounding cast, a better point guard we'll talk about today. And there's a lot of options. There's so many. We'll talk about the draft, free agency, like you said. And the Spurs, there a lot of people in there stuck with contract stipulations with other guys on this roster. And if they wanted to go on trade for a lot of superstar talent, how would they structure that around this roster and who would they give up? But let me tell you, I've got a lot of good information for you guys, and I'm really excited to have you. I'm really excited for you guys to have me. Sorry. So really appreciate you guys.
Thanks a bunch, Evan, and we're excited to have you on here on the inaugural episode of the Head of the Game podcast. Chris, I want to flip it to you real quick. Go ahead and talk about just one guard in this draft that you think it would be a good fit next to Victor.
Thank you, sir. The first person that I would think of, I think they're all different. And the first person that I just want to bring up is Nikola Topic, because I think that his speed and passing just immediately fits with Victor and really with Vassell as well. I think those are the two guys, Vassell and Victor, that are so critical to this conversation. And you hope Sohan becomes one of those guys, and you hope that Keldon can really fit in. But I think the two main guys that you're trying to fit the prospect, whoever it may be, point guard or not, alongside are Vassell and Victor. And Topic is such an interesting player because of his size and speed and natural passing ability. He's like an 87% shooter from the free throw line. Even though the shot has been a little hesitant from three, he's not pulling as soon as he gets the catch in the spot situation. I think that comes with time. He's got all the shot doesn't look broken. There's no weird hitch in it. It should be fine eventually. And he really is someone who I think with his get up and go, he's pushing in transition off makes and off misses. That's the kind of thing that can really get this Spurs offense moving at the next level, I think. Because Victor's so mobile, because Vassell's so willing to get out of transition. That's such a fantastic trio of guys. And even though he's never going to probably be a defensive impact player, his size and speed and generally his work ethic on the defensive side, I would say, is a good starting point for these combos.
I think, Chris, to that point, I think you did an excellent job breaking that down. And I think the other thing that Topic brings to the floor, at least from my perspective on this, is that his processing speed when he reads screen and rolls is really, really top notch. And to Evan's point earlier, Evan, talking about passing screen away, the Spurs do a lot of off-ball recognition in terms of how they space the floor, how they choose to attack defenses, and it's five guys reading at the same time. And they really focus on smart players who can process really quickly. And I think that's where Topic excels. Not his size, his ability to look over the top of the defense is incredible. But just being able to assess as he's mid-play, I think is one of the things that makes him a really smart fit for this team.
I really do like Topic. It's been hard to evaluate him as of late because he hasn't played since January. It's been, a couple months. And when you evaluate these guys and when you're, waiting for the inside information to get out, you have to be kind of skeptical pretty much to put it this way. If the Spurs were to rely on him to be, let's say, get him with their pick, or let's say if the Raptors pick conveys, they want him to play. They really want him to play. So if his knee is okay and if his medicals pass, I was really hoping to see him play again for Red Star. He left Mega Basket in a kind of a bet on himself move. His mentor was Milos. How do you say his last name? He was playing for the Clippers. Milos. He starts with a T. I can never pronounce it, but he's his guy. He's his mentor. I'm not sure how much in touch and training he has with him, but that's in a sense what his game is resembling. A taller, stronger, pass first, floater game. I don't want to call it Ricky Rubio. I don't want to say Lonzo Ball, but like a skip ahead. He's going to make that advanced read. and he's always going to find comfort when he finds his spot. I don't have the shooting charts in front of me, but he did find comfort in the top of the key three, off the dribble, when guys were slacking off of him and giving him a little bit extra room. The corners and the wings, not so much, but he has a good float game. And with the Spurs, he's got to have a good float game. I don't want to compare. I hate when people get so mad when I compare him to like the former Spurs point guards that weren't the best shooters. But in the way the Spurs system goes, with Wemby off the floor, they're gonna run the Spurs offense. Like, what other offense do they have with Coach Pop? You know, so if he were to play with Wemby, if he were to not, I'm almost positive. When I say almost positive, there's a lot of quirks in his game, a lot of off the ball, not just dribble moves, but hesitation moves to create more space. And with Wemby lowering all this gravity, Topic can have unlock a lot to his game with time if he has the I don't want to say like the respect from the front office, but if he has the timeline to do so. A lot of guys, a lot of guards, a lot of people think um, a lot of fans think that the guards and the wings on this team don't have too much time to develop, or they don't have too much time to figure out what kind of player that they are. But with Topic, he's the lead initiator point guard. You know exactly what he is. So if he has a full season to figure out adjusting the NBA speed, work on his defensive sliding, his hips are a little stiff. He's not the quickest guy for his size, but he has a good burst of speed. That's a real good surprise. The hesitation moves get you like that. He'll get to the basket before you know it. 1-2 step, and he has a paint touch. So I really do like Topic's game, and him as a Spur, it should work out. Is he my number one guy though? I forgot. I have to update my board. It's been forever. I have him maybe the third or fourth point guard, and that may sound like a shock for the Spurs, but we'll see how he plays. He has to go to the combine. He's gonna be okay. He's gonna be fine in about a month's time. He's gonna go to the combine. We'll see him against all the top guys, and it's gonna be really, really fun to watch.
So, my one big concern with Topic at this point is that he's a one-level scorer. He's amazing at that level. He was in the 85th percentile for layup scoring, scoring 1.36 points per possession. Dynamite number. He had 0 dunk attempts, so he's a below-the-rim one-level scorer. That's concerning to me. He is a very crafty finisher. He can get to his spots pretty much when he wants. I do think he's somewhat of a take what the defense gives him kind of guy and excel at that. If he runs the screen and roll and the defense traps up high, he'll hit the pop of the roll man pretty much without fail. So he makes the right decision over and over again. What I worry about is, for one, does his limits kind of lock the Spurs into a play style? Alex referenced it earlier as far as, do you want Wemby running 40 pick and rolls a game? Can he? Yes, absolutely. Wembanyama could play that role. He can play almost any role, most likely. I do wonder, how much are we locking him into that? And with a point guard that makes the right play based on what the defense gives him, is it going to be easy enough for the defenses to take away Wembanyama? If you know that the point guard is going to make the correct pass rather than being able to force it into the player that you really want the ball to, the defense has a little bit of power over where your offense kind of is directed. So that's something that I am a little bit worried about. As far as the shot goes, I think his release point's a little bit low for my liking. It's a little bit more forward than up. But he does have the really good free throw percentage, and usually that bears out to at least a passable shooter. So I don't think that his shooting right now is something that we need to be panicking about. He's definitely a better shooter than someone I really love, like a Thompson. But so we're not talking about that level of shooting. He definitely, I think, projects as a shooter, whether that's a 36% shooter, a 35 or a 38. I'm not sure. I don't think it's gonna be much higher than that. Now that I said that, though, he probably will be hitting 45% just so this can get clipped. And then, as y'all say, his passing, I think he has above average court mapping that allows him to make the right play again. I don't think it's anything prodigious, but it's something that he is definitely a strength of his. Chris, did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. And to the point of the low shot, I do agree. He gets a very strange amount of those step back attempts that he has attempted. He doesn't take that many of them, but a lot of those get blocked. He either doesn't have a great feel for when the defender's close enough, or it's just maybe his short arms in the lower release. One of the things that I really like his floor mapping, like you mentioned, because he really excels in chaos. Whenever there's a turnover, whenever there's any kind of nonsense going on, a defensive mistake, transition, he really is great at finding the right player. I mean, he manipulates in transition. He does a really good job with that. And I think Wemby really thrives in chaos as well, just because he's the ultimate mismatch. So I think that's a really great fit. Defensively, I almost am more concerned than anything for the Spurs, particularly because more of a Vassell conversation than a Wemby conversation, because I think Vassell's defense has been, when he was coming in, I thought he was going to be just an absolute lockdown guy. And to this point, I'm just wrong about that. He's been, like a good team defender, but maybe not the ultimate point of attack guy I thought he'd be. I'm a little concerned about Vassell and Topic being next to each other, kind of in the guard spots, unless we're going to move Vassell up to be guarding bigger guys, which I'm not super thrilled about. But having those two guys back to back, you're not looking at a fantastic point of attack defense out there on the perimeter, and that does concern me long term, hampering Wemby and the Spurs in that way.
Alex, how about you go ahead and bring up the next prospect you want to talk about that would be a good fit next to Victor?
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting prospect, and I think we could spend probably 25 minutes discussing what it means to be a point guard or all those things in relation to this prospect, and that's Stephon Castle from UConn. The obvious first question is he a point guard? And this year, UConn kind of played by committee with Newton and Spencer up there at the top, and Castle got his fair share of initiating the offense. And a lot of people are listing him as a point guard. I kind of see him more as a little bit of a combo guard, somebody who can do a lot of things, but is not necessarily going to be a guy who's initiating offense. But nonetheless, I do think he's a very interesting prospect to slot in there. And that's primarily because of his defensive capabilities. He's very long. He's very good at using leverage and length and just tipping passes, creating opportunities, even a little bit of shot blocking. That's something he can do. Offensively, here's the question. So he was a pretty successful pick and roll handler. Let me grab the numbers real quick so we can take a look at it. He ran a decent number of pick and rolls, all things considered, 72, which, for college game, that's not too bad, but he was really good at sort of dissecting it. And he got into this thing where he would get into the mid range. He's got a nice little float game. He knows how to kind of stop and go to get to his spots. He really likes to be at like about 11 feet, sort of herky jerky in his game. But I think that his ability to synthesize with Klingon is really what's critical here. Klingon is one of those guys that you never want to say like, man, that reminds me of Wembanyama, because obviously he's one of one. But Klingon moves really well. He's a guy who can kind of get the ball and do a couple of things with it. He's not just playing straight to the basket. And this is where I think Castle really excelled. As a cutter, as a secondary guy off the ball, sometimes he'd initiate the play. They'd go into a pick and roll. He'd dump it down to Klingon, and then he'd relocate and be able to get an underneath the basket layup or something like that. And so I think there's a lot to like. I think most of it is defensively for Castle. But I don't want to discount immediately the idea that, as Chris said, going back to the Vassell conversation, Vassell ran a ton of pick and rolls this year, and he was actually pretty good at it. He was one of the better pick and roll handlers in the league. He was at 0.9 points per possession. So it's not out of the question that you could find a guy who's not necessarily a lead guard and be able to do it from a defensive perspective. And it also covers up that gap of Vassell has not been the point of attack defender that I think coming out of Florida State we all thought he could be. Whereas Castle, I think, brings a little bit more defensive utility. And so all of a sudden you have a backcourt here who can do some things that have some size and kind of share the playmaking duties. Now, that is directly contrary, of course, to what I said in the beginning, where, talking about Trey Jones was one of the best partners for Wembanyama all year. And so I think when you're examining Castle as a prospect in regards to fitting with the Spurs, it's like, well, we probably want somebody who plays the point guard position, or we probably want somebody who's a little bit of a settler, somebody who can get us into an offensive set, in those situations where we need to get a bucket. Okay, well, let's get everybody in position. And that's something they really lack this year. I don't think Castle's that guy, but I do think there's enough interesting pieces as you look around his game to say, man, there's something to take a look at here in regards to just all the things he can do on both ends of the floor.
That does beg the question, what are the Spurs looking for out of a point guard next to Wembanyama? Evan, do you have anything you want to add about Castle's game and potential fit next to Wembanyama?
Yeah, he's one jump shot away from being a top 5 lock. This class is kind of weak. There's not a solidified number 1 guy anymore. Apparently, Alex Sarr's number 2 on major boards now, which is kind of a shock. But Stephon Castle has honestly the best fit. Alex broke that down very well. Shout out to you, Alex. The best fit for the Spurs for the point guard, long-term point guard position, if they were to keep Vassell around. Let me answer that. Blake Wesley, I don't believe, is the starting point guard for the long-term future. Neither is Trey Jones. Jalen Brunson, 2 or 3 dribbles, mid-range, unstoppable. That can't happen against a Trey Young. That can't happen against a De'Aaron Fox. That can't happen against these elite point guards in the Western Conference and Eastern Conference. Anybody. That can't happen. Wemby is not a point of attack defender. Jamie Sohan is the point of attack defender, right? But Stephon Castle is the perfect complementary to these guys. If we're talking Spurs offense, defense, and running through Wemby, Stephon Castle will take 3 or 4 shots. He'll get to the line 2 or 3 times if he's a Spurs long-term point guard 2 seasons from now. Next to Vassell, next to probably Sohan, next to another probably starting caliber 4, stretch 4, 3 and D4, and then Wemby at the 5. Rob Dillingham, he's 160. No, not 160. He's 180. 180. I'll give him that. He's 180. Soaking wet though, right? Nikola Topic, he's gonna have to do a lot of weight work to get to 200, right? I know there's point guards that aren't 180, 190 that are stronger, that can have a wiggle to their game, that can survive in the NBA, right? It's not just you got to be in this 200 club to, right? But if Stephon Castle can find, here's the thing y'all know about Spurs fans. Everybody despises the fact that our what was his name? I forgot his name top of my head. We had a shooting coach that just saved everyone's jump shot. Kawhi's, Manu's, and he actually left to go
Chip England.
Chip England. He left to go to OKC, and we replaced him with a new shooting coach. And Jimmy has done great things. He's the guy that made Sohan shoot the one-handed free throws. And Jimmy Barron has helped a lot of people. Trey Jones, 40% to end of the year after the All-Star break. Zach Collins found his jump shot again. And he tweaked a lot of these guys' jump shots that were already shooters that just needed a little bit more refinement to get it off in time. And with Stephon, it'll be a little bit of a work. It'll be a little bit of a 1 or 2 month camp ordeal they got going on. 500 shots for they move on to the next to the next spot. But I love his game, and he's the best point of attack defender for his position. And if he's not a point guard, let it be a combo guard. We would love another point guard in next year's class. And I love another point guard that we can trade for it, whether if it's even Trey Young, Wemby's best friend, apparently, to be a complimentary piece. So if he doesn't have to be a starting caliber point guard, he has to get a good amount of minutes, whether if it's 15, 20, his career will fill out to what the amount of minutes he would get with Pop. So,
Chris, did you want to add anything about Castle, or you want to move on to the next prospect?
No, I'll just touch on Castle, and I think Alex probably wants to hop back in for just a moment here. For Castle, I agree. I think he's absolutely the best defensive fit. by a mile here. He's just leaning into a generational defensive player by adding and complementing the defense with what is missing. I think is absolutely a a fantastic way to do this. And it's something that we worry about with some of these other guys. Like you mentioned, I do think Dillingham probably is 160. Topic is never going to be a point of attack guy. And a lot of the free agents, when you're talking about Trae Young, as great as that would be, and maybe that does unlock more, something closer to the 40 pick and roll thing for Wembanyama, because how often do you see anyone in the world point to the sky more than Wembanyama when he's trying to roll? Castle really leans into the generational portion of this. The generational portion of Wembanyama is the defense. He walked in the door as a defensive player of the year candidate. That he's so unfreaking believable on offense is like almost gravy. It's so unbelievable. The whole thing is such a freak show that everything on offense, how great he's been is just in my mind almost extra. Lean into the defense. Castle is the best fit if you're going to go that direction. I absolutely agree.
Now there's a couple different ways you can impact defense. The next guy that I think we should talk about impacts defense a slightly different way. He's more of a chaos creator. Alice, you want to talk about how Reed Sheppard might fit next to Wembanyama?
Yeah, I mean, Sheppard is one of the most interesting prospects in this draft, and I think this goes back to what Evan said, and something I've kind of talked about with you guys about is this draft is one of those like flow chart drafts where it's like, well, do I need a big? If I need a big, I go down this way because there's no consensus number one, and I think amongst us here, we've even talked about is Dillingham a guy that is Reed Sheppard a guy that you would take at one? Sorry, I've got my Kentucky guards mixed up there in my head. Is Reed Sheppard a guy that you would consider taking with the number one pick? And that, of course, lends itself to a million other questions about what does it mean, like what is draft value and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into as we get towards draft season. But with Sheppard, there's the big thing. There's the huge thing, as you alluded to, is the steals, the ability to just tip passes, get in passing lanes. He's not big, he's, what, maybe 190, 6'3", something like that. But he has this just sort of innate instinct, an ability to jump passes, to create tip balls, to do defensively what you see from a very disruptive force. Tip passes became one of those sexy things that we talked about with Thabo. And Thabo was his ability to just get into lanes and create things like that. I don't think Reed Sheppard has quite that level of impact, but I certainly see something there where it's like, wow, this is a guy who can make it pretty difficult to initiate your offense just by, and I'm talking about things like where he's on ball, tipping passes coming out, not necessarily as an off ball player. This is point of attack stuff where he has this ability, these long arms, big hands, quick, strong, to actually create havoc at the point of attack. And that's something that, talking about the Wembanyama point, like, yeah, you've got this generational guy. So what if you compound it with defense on defense? I think, there are questions about Sheppard, his ability to get the line. I think as it has been maligned a little bit, he doesn't get fouled a lot. He's kind of a jump shooter, but he's a good jump shooter. And so I think there's a lot to take away from him there and say, well, yeah, this is a player that with the Spurs ability to clearly, we have 20, 30 years of evidence that they can develop guys. They can bring guys into the league as one thing and develop them into something else. Sheppard has NBA level skills. He has elite NBA level skills. But it's just, can you mold it into something that's usable? And I think beside Wembanyama, actually having a guy who's not necessarily dive into the rim all the time as a shot creator, somebody who's a little more comfortable in the mid range, a little more comfortable shooting threes, and has a shot game that can be developed. He's an 83% free throw shooter, so you think there's some growth to be had as a shooter, particularly off the dribble. That's something that guys develop as they come into the league a little more. And so Sheppard, I think there's a lot to like, but then you just present yourself with these big questions. Is he big enough? Is he somebody who's going to get picked on in the playoffs when you have to play teams that play bigger guards? If you have to play a LA Clippers or something like that, how does Reed Sheppard fit into something like that? And so that's really what you're looking at with him. we'll get into this a little more as the draft season goes along, but I don't really see why you wouldn't look and say, man, Reed Sheppard merits consideration at the number 1 pick. But that's a much different question of, is he the point guard of the future for the Spurs? And so to me, he's not. I wouldn't have him as high on my board if I'm the Spurs as Castle, just because I like a lot of what Castle does a little bit more in terms of what he brings to the table. But I definitely see Sheppard's ability to get into passing lanes, to generate that point of attack chaos, to turn games with his defensive ability as something that you can build on.
Evan, Chris, either one of y'all want to jump in and add to that or counter?
Yeah, no, I love Reed Sheppard's game. Broke many records, had long streaks, shooting the ball from deep. But you know, we all know he's a role player, and he hasn't necessarily decided if he's going to be in this draft just quite yet. It'll be a hell of a story if he's like his parents and turns into like this Kentucky just legend. The UIL money just keeps racking in, you know. But as a Spur, as a complimentary guard, they have one already in Blake Wesley. And, you know, I don't want to say that neither of them are going to be the point guard of the future, the lead initiator of the future, but it's not the best fit per se. And one of them would have to be moved, preferably Blake Wesley. If Reed Sheppard were to, I would be so mad. All due respect to all the guys, a lot of draft guys are probably going to listen to this, that had Reed Sheppard as their top guy with the Spurs, whether it was a first, second, or third pick the last couple of weeks. It's all, hey, I disagree, but it's all due respect at the end of the day. I would take him with the Raptors pick if it conveys. Just because if he were to be a better Grayson Allen, or let's say the best of Grayson Allen is lining up in that corner for the Suns most of the season. And, you know, that's exactly what Reed Sheppard's game. He's a complimentary guard that can make the right reads, keep the offense flowing, and will be a smaller guard, lockdown defender. Maybe. I can't. I spoke too soon. Maybe. And if you can do that, you know, the Pat Bevs of the world. I'm not gonna call him an Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso is all NBA team defender, right? He gives people hell, right? Reed Sheppard, he's a better team defender than Devin Vassell. He's a better point of attack defender than Devin Vassell. Will he be that guy next to Wemby that can make all the reads, push the tempo of the offense, not be scared to make turnovers, but not turn the ball over at the same time? You know, the Spurs really have had point guards that have been able to take care of the ball and that make sure that guys are hitting, and that I know for the most part people are saying, oh, Wemby's teammates don't like him and they're avoiding passing the ball. For the longest time, I actually kind of believed it because the evidence is right in front of us. So we would look at it when he's right open in the lane and we see James Sohan doing a spinorama, just spin, dribble, drive, fade away, and we're just like, But that obviously is not the case. I don't believe that obviously anymore. It's like a 2 or 3 week thing on Twitter. Everyone was like hype about it, but when it comes down to it, Reed Sheppard should be able to make those reads, and if he does, you know, it'll be interesting to see how long and how he's utilized with the Spurs. When I say how long, what I'm saying how long that would take. Because Pop just doesn't give everyone the realm right away. I was kind of surprised Jamie Sohan, we were the worst team in the NBA by far. You know, Wemby the Spurs was terrible, but he gave him the first start in almost a decade since Tim Duncan as a rookie right away. People get the Austin Spurs treatment, get your sweat equity as the Spurs fans say. But no, Reed Sheppard should be plugged and played right away. We just have to move some spots because the combo guard in Malachi Branham doesn't really work out. He's more of a shooter. Blake Wesley, we don't know what he is per se. He has a turnover issue. He's just a speedy guard, likes to get to his rim, get to the rim. But we'll see. We'll see how that works out.
I think, Evan, to your point there, there's a question. There's a sort of like this paradox around Sheppard of, is he elite defensively? Which, you know, point of attack, I think he's shown a lot of tools where a guy like he's a very disruptive force. But I think there's also a big question of like team defense. Like it's a very difficult concept to say a guy that size, he doesn't have exceptional wingspan. He's not physically super imposing. Is he a guy that you can stand up to this sort of repeated assault that you see in a playoff situation? And of course, that's not a question for next year. that's not even a question maybe for 2 years from now. But I think the Spurs are sort of cognizant of what happens as we go forward into next season, and then beyond. Like, do our players hold up to what we understand as playoff basketball? And I think that's the Reed Sheppard paradox is, man, here's a great point of attack defender. Here's a dude with all kinds of instincts to play defensively, but also the physical components that make up his game, just sort of raise these questions of, does he hold up? And I think we've seen players at this size who've been able to hold up. I think we've seen the ability to grow defensively, to understand how to not get picked on or how to hide a player, so to allow him to excel in a defensive role that's not necessarily point of attack. I don't know what happens with Reed Sheppard, but I think if you're looking at him as a prospect, whether you're the Spurs or another team, that's one of the big questions you have to look at and go, well, what is he? Is he great at defense, or is he somebody who potentially could be a liability? And I think right now, as you look at him, the answer might be both.
Yeah, and I'll jump in very quickly on Reed here. Reed is such an unbelievable team defender here, and I think that's really the big strength and why I think he differentiates. He's a little different than the Caruso mold, and Caruso's great at that too. Reed doesn't quite have that level of athleticism, point of attack, kind of delete you from the game skill. So Reed is going to be more of a help defense expert. The problem is he's 6'3". What he does bring is that he's strong 6'3". So I think, like Alex was pointing out, he's going to be able to try to find. He's going to be at least working really hard to find ways. I think he's got good length. His stock numbers are crazy, obviously. So I think the length is there, at least in a solid enough way, and he is maybe the best offensive fit, in my opinion, with Wembanyama, just because of the spacing. Vassell is able to put some pressure on the rim. Victor doesn't need a lot of help with that. He needs some space here, and Reed's a fantastic passer too, even if he's not a Topic level passer, and he's not maybe a put pressure on the rim guy like Topic or Dillingham, who we can talk about next. His overwhelming shooting, we talked about how he's a good shooter. He's a really, really good shooter. He's like a historic level college shooting, and he is a phenomenal. He moves in space. He's fantastic relocating, and he's going to be a phenomenal fit with Victor. And I agree with Evan on this. I think the second pick, if that Raptors pick conveys, is where I'd be targeting him if I'm the Spurs. I'd be a little uncomfortable with the pick as high as they may have taking him, but maybe I know just me. But Alex is giving me the wave off. But for me, I'm with Evan. I'm not sure that I would want to take Reed with the first pick here. But that second pick, if that Raptors pick conveys, that would be a golden chance, I think. Moving on, we could start talking about Reed Sheppard a little bit. I'm sorry, Dillingham. I did the same thing. I'm mixing up.
Same thing. You get those guards mixed.
It's insane. Dillingham is a different kind of offensive player. The shooting is also phenomenal. He is really great above the break, the step backs. He really can. He's more of a dynamic playmaker. He puts pressure on the rim. He's a transition nightmare. He's always moving, makes misses, whatever. The problem with Dillingham, and as much as I love watching the offense and think that could come along and potentially be pretty high level in the future, is the defense is quite problematic. And I don't even think it's the 160. The 160 is not great, obviously, but he is so quick that he's able to kind of stay in front of guys on ball when he's locked in. The problem is the locked in issue. The locked in issue is very bad. He is losing guys off ball constantly. He so overhelps. He tries to dig down from a mile away to steal the ball, to try to steal the ball, and is constantly unsuccessful and leaves this guy wide open. It's a real problem, and as great as the offense is, it does make me nervous. I also think the passing is better than it seems from the numbers, because I think he weirdly would go through stretches where he is scoring Dillingham or passing Dillingham, and it was very odd. And I don't know if it was a time when the coach would sit him down and where coach would sit him down and tell him to focus on one thing. But he would go through almost Chris Paul-like stretches where he'd have 8 assists and 1 turnover, 8 assists, no turnover. And then he'd just go back to scoring Dillingham and become Kyrie the gunner. It's just like an interesting dichotomy. It's like there's two rods. And it was really fun to watch. But I think the passing version, the Spurs could unlock the passing version of Dillingham, who's just a fantastic shooter, able to put some pressure on the rim and be just like a better decision maker. That's the guy that I would be thrilled to have on the Spurs, even if the defense isn't ideal.
I mean, I think the defense is like, I may even go further and say like it's problematic. I don't think it's at an NBA level, which doesn't mean that he can't thicken up and get stronger. But my biggest concern, if I'm looking at Rob Dillingham as a prospect, is I don't think he fits the mold that the Spurs want to play in. And you hit on this, Chris, really well. Is that this is a smart team. I think that switching gears of Dillingham, the scoring Rob versus passing Rob, I think that's sort of indicative of like a guy who's not super comfortable with what he does. He's trying to incorporate teammates, and he feels like that's something he has to do to be able to score. I think he's a score first guy. And I don't necessarily think like his ability to play off ball, to be involved in a system, to be a part of a system, to like, he's just, to me, kind of this guy who does his own thing. It's like, you've got a Rob Dillingham, you're going to give it to him and he may pass it out of there. But he's not a guy you're going to revolve an entire system around. And he's not a guy, to me right now at this level, who fits in with the very complex pass and screen away, always moving, always reading, 5 people reading the defense at the same time system. And so to me, that's really where you look at Rob Dillingham, which is not to say I don't think he's an NBA prospect. I certainly do. But because of the complexity of the system that the Spurs want to run, I'm not certain he's the guy who fits into that system exactly as cleanly as you want him to.
Evan, you're more familiar with the Spurs system than anyone else on this call. So what do you think about Dillingham's potential fit in that system as far as what he brings and how that fit works next to Victor?
Yeah, you guys all made great takes and are all 100% accurate when it comes down to it. He's not necessarily I know this may sound weird to people, being a point guard in a point guard's body and not being a lead initiator, but he's not a lead initiator. He's an off-ball scorer. He's an off-ball initiator. He's more comfortable getting the ball, doing a little shake and bake move rather than getting the ball and passing and screening away. But here's the thing. Here's what's wild. I was shocked to see that he got invited to ESPN to announce that he's going to listen to his name in the draft and that he's signing with Clutch. And the first question Malika Andrews asked him is, hey, yeah, so Victor Wembanyama, he's a generational prospect, and what would you think about your fit with the Spurs as the first question, not any other team, not any other player. And it's just like, who made this call? How did this? And he said, "Oh, I think he's a great kid, great smile." Of course, when you put a label to a name, or when you hear things through the grapevine, I call it the Gigi Jackson effect, right? Gigi Jackson got, I don't want to say cheated out the first round, but did y'all see Gigi Jackson the other day playing the drums for his church and just, doing his thing with a good old, smile? He's a good kid. He's a good kid. He got cheated by his own coach and his own AD for some UIL issues and him not wanting to promote stuff, this and that, and wanting to take all the shots and the team being terrible. The same thing, not necessarily the same thing is going to happen to Rob, but the narrative effect of if he can fit with the team or if he's the right kind of character around the Spurs, because the Spurs do their research. I know there's been a couple guys, I'm not going to say any names, that may or may not have been the perfect Spur per se, and they kind of keep they call it the Spurs way intact and making sure they just do their research. They get a lot of guys that are about to be married, get a lot of guys that are just great individuals and kind of just boring and don't really like to do a lot of things per se. A lot of just women likes to read books. A lot of these guys don't like to go out. They just do their own thing. Is that the same with Rob Dillingham? I don't know. But with Rob back on track, let's say this. If Rob Dillingham gets the keys to the Spurs, you have to make sure that his backup, or if he's the backup, they got to be a lead initiator defender. They got to be over 6'3", 6'4". Rob Dillingham and me are the exact same size. That's what I was telling people in Spurs Spaces earlier this year. I need Rob Dillingham to be on more protein shakes than me. I need him to do way more push-ups than me on a daily basis. Rob Dillingham can be pushed off his spot really easily. He's strong. He has a good build, but he's still nimble. And anybody from a Luka, from a Jalen Brunson, anybody can have their ways with him. And while he has quick feet, he can slide. I've never actually seen an issue with him on defense besides maybe it's him getting actually just Steven Adams with the screen, just get just level with the screen, and him having to just like shake himself back into it. But I'll look more into it. I have to look more on synergy to see if I can find him slacking on defense. But with Rob and all the ties that I was seeing, I think that may have been like just a Batman call for the Spurs to bring him in for a workout while he's in Texas. But we'll see how that plays out. Is Rob and Clutch going to have an effect with any future trades and free agency? I just had to say it just because I feel like that's going to be a thing. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's other. I know. I'll say this last thing. I know there's other agencies besides Clutch, and there's a lot of moves that people make that just, oh, this is a thing. This must be a thing. It's a domino effect. The reason why you never see this type of things and these type of just obvious mannerisms is because people are forcing their hand in the front office. Whether if it's Trae Young, I know he posts that quote every single day, but he's all in people's comments about Wemby and the Lakers and all these people's likes. That is just, I know that's just not appropriate. I know that you can't, you're not, your GM is not liking that, and vice versa. When you push stuff for the Spurs and when you get stuff on ESPN, it's just like, all right, we'll see how this goes. But so, there's probably maybe a 2 or 3 team, 4 team trade has been discussed for a long time. We'll see how what picks land in what spot, and anybody want to fake out a retirement or not, and LeBron or not can depend on who goes to the Lakers in return or all these other teams. So there's a lot of we'll see scenarios, and that all depends on the Spurs, which is just kind of wild. It's just honestly really wild. So it's not inside information you just heard, but that's just really what I feel, and then just I'm kind of seeing the all between the lines. So yeah. Sorry about that long take, but had to get that off with Rob. He's a funny guy. He's a really funny guy.
No, not a problem at all. So Evan, there's one more guy that I think maybe you had in your top 10. I'm not sure if he still is. Isaiah Collier. Do you view him as a potential fit, or is he maybe a better fit with another team?
I really do. I really do admire Isaiah Collier's game. He's the perfect point guard build for the Spurs. But here's the thing. I don't know where his where his field is for the depth chart for the Spurs in terms of how many guards they want to bring in, and how many and how he would evaluate compared to them. I'm looking at guards like a Dick Paint that would be in the G League for more than a year, but is 6'8", a stronger build, 200, 210, a 3-level scorer, Isaiah Collier. We've seen flashes of the 3-level scoring. We've seen flashes of the advanced playmaking, but both these guys have terrible turnover issues, and obviously they have to adjust to the NBA speed, and that'll take some time as well. But who would you bet on? The 6'8" younger guy, that has a better build and stronger, or would you bet on the 6'3" top 10 pick that you have to give him the time of day? You have to give him not the time of day, but you have to give him the time span to develop all that's kind of crunched, because we have to see him if he develops next to Wemby. And if he doesn't, we'll see. And I think we talked about one other guy. I know I'll make this real quick. We talked about one other guy before the podcast that I really do think that the Spurs are going to look at it, and it's really just a gut feeling, because I know that their depth in the center position isn't where fans want it to be. And in terms of trade scenarios, a lot of people think that a lot of Spurs fans just want Zach Collins gone. He's made a lot of mistakes, and he's not necessarily the stretch bit that he was at the end of the year last year. He in January and February was like 1 for 30 for three. It was terrible. Yeah, and that was after he took 25 shots when Wemby was out one game. So Zach Collins, I really do appreciate you, but in terms of a center replacement for him, Donovan Clingan, the UConn big, just declared for the draft. I'll say this: Charles Bassey is 6'9", 6'10", right? Sandro Mamukelele had a couple games, double doubles. Could made a lot of money off him on double doubles. The past couple of games, we'll see if he's a lead initiator, break type of guy. He's more of a four, but he's 6'9", 6'10". Don Barlow didn't play the last couple games of the season, last 10th of the season. So we'll see if he comes back. He's wanted to bet on himself. He's not necessarily a center. He's more of like a tweener, forward center type of 6'9", 230, 240 type of guy, maybe 220. But let's see. Donovan Clingan, huge, 7'3", 250, 260, comes in. You trade Zach Collins in October. And here's the thing. The rotation of Wemby, as long as he can play 30 minutes, 32 minutes, the backup big's only going to be playing 10, 13 minutes a game, right? Zach Collins is making all this money, $16, $17 million. He's not necessarily deserving DNPs per se, but you have to play him. If Charles Bassey comes back healthy, if we can maybe grab another, I don't know, like a Chesime Metu, who was a former Spur, just another emergency big that is not on a minimum contract, that doesn't necessarily need minutes, but can be a plug-and-play guy in terms of a system for the Spurs. Donovan Clingan next to Wemby. I know next to Wemby isn't necessarily a thing per se, but you can throw out these crazy zones. I know you guys don't watch a lot of, maybe miss a lot of Spurs basketball, but they're running a 1-3-1 zone with Wemby being playing on the nail on the exact free throw line, and he was it was insane. There's no floaters. It was coming out onto the perimeter, swiping out on guys, getting steals and deflections. It was amazing. It was so fun to see. And with Donovan Clingan being a nail defender, an amazing rim protector behind him, I don't know who can. I'll say this: there's teams that can stop that. There's ways you can manipulate. You can get around it, but it's a way of really locking down that paint. And the Spurs have been terrible. Have been absolutely terrible in the paint. Terrible in rebounds. Terrible on the offensive glass. Terrible in paint defense all around. And Donovan Clingan doesn't necessarily fix all that right away, but he's super young. He knows his game, and he's not a guy that's going to be playing 25, 30 minutes a night. So if you plug him next to maybe one or two guys that can fit next to Wemby, that can both play multiple positions, and he's just a nail, you're ready to play good 12, 13, 14 minutes. People say the same thing about Zach Edey, but I know the pick and roll defense isn't the best, but when we think about it, he's more mobile. If he can knock down one or two threes a game, maybe one or two threes a game, who knows? We'll see. So.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to unpack there. Alex, you wanted to mention a few later round prospects that you thought maybe when I say later round, I don't know if you're late first, second, whatever you see as their fit. Just throw out a couple names and quick fits how you think they'd fit with Wemby.
Yeah, a couple of guys. I think that the Spurs have this pick at 46, and then of course the UDFA market's always going to be hot for players like this. They're both 4-year guys. Jamal Shed at Houston is a player that I think really would fit in. He's smaller, he's 6'1", but he's big, stocky. We saw what he could do. He got a lot of national exposure as Houston advanced in the tournament. I think there's a lot to like there. He's not a guy who's going to be a point of attack defender, but he can initiate an offense. And then secondarily to that, he can play off the ball as a catch and shoot guy who was exceptional at both those things. And then Mark Sears from Alabama, kind of in a similar mold. Like, again, a little bit of a smaller guy, but thick trunk. He's not going to get picked on too much. You always have a little bit of problem with those guys, but Sears is a lights out shooter. He's a good relocator. He can shoot off the dribble. Those are guys that, you're not going to look at the fifth pick, or you're not going to look at the Toronto pick. But as it starts to play out, I think there's a nice point guard market a little bit later in this draft. And those are the two big names that I wanted to throw out there as guys who I see as potential fits. But it's not something you're going to use a ton of draft equity on, but it's somebody who I think you bring in either one of those guys, and I think they play next year and they contribute.
Now, one big thing we got to take into consideration is the Spurs are definitely going to be attempting to, compete right away. They have Wembanyama, who they can't just let sit on another 20-25 win season. I think they got to make winning moves right now, which will definitely include bringing in a floor general this offseason, whether that's by trade or free agency. There are a few names I think that are interesting out there. One's already been listed as someone who wants to play with Wemby and Trae Young. That would be a trade. Alex, what are some avenues you think they could improve that point guard spot through free agency or trade this offseason?
Ooh, the free agency market is not good. It's going to be really tough. The Spurs have a ton of equity to acquire somebody via trade. But the point guard market, when you're looking at it, I think it comes down to how do you feel about Tyus Jones? That's kind of the question of the market. And Jones is a guy who could fit with them. I think he's making like right at 14.5 this year. So I don't know what it's going to be, probably looking in the 17-18 range. Is that a guy you want to turn the keys to your offense over? Washington was a little bit of a mess. Now, we can discuss all day whether Tyus Jones added or detracted from the mess that was the Washington Wizards. But I do think he's a player who kind of fits the words that have floated around here. You need somebody who can get you into an offense. You need somebody who can settle you down, get quality possessions, get Wemby the ball in the spots that he wants to. So that's a guy that you can take a look at. But when you get beyond that, boy, it is slim pickings out there.
I got a couple guys. The first one is someone that I had no idea was playing basketball on this planet 7 months ago. This is my own jurisdiction of not being a super studious basketball analyst in Italy, but I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm so sorry, but his first name is Simone. He's originally from Utah, and he traded to the Detroit Pistons. He is a restricted free agent. I was about to say Fontesinio, but I'm gonna take your word for that. I have no idea how to pronounce his last name. I'm super sorry for saying that. And I know I'm sorry, but hey, listen. In terms of being the perfect 3-and-D veteran that you can bet on being for one of the best value contracts in the league, while the Pistons traded a first-round pick for him, and I think he actually may be an unrestricted free agent. There's going to be a lot of teams, a lot of great teams vouching for him, knowing that, hey, do you want to be a champion for the Denver Nuggets for $7 million rather than 11, 12, 13 for the Detroit Pistons or the Utah Jazz, or maybe the Spurs can up it to 14? Maybe replace Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson's the Devontae Grahams of the world, the guys that are signed for a couple of years that may or may not be Spurs for long-term futures. They may not be a Spurs in the long-term future. That is, there's a lot of different scenarios, and it all comes down to what I was talking about earlier, the picks. Say the Spurs have the first or second pick, right? Alex Sarr and Wemby. Hey, I actually was really for that 3 months ago. I was saying Alex Sarr was my number one guy, right? A lot has changed. It's a long story with that, but we'll talk about that if we have time. And I'm trying to have a long spiel again. I do apologize for that earlier. But when it comes down to it, if they were to say, hey, the Wizards, Alex Sarr wants to be the guy. He wants to be the number one option. He's not trying to live in the back shadow of Wemby. There's agency ties. They're both French, but, maybe they're just not on the same page, right? Hey, yeah, we'll trade you Denny Avila. And Kellen Johnson is a DMV native. Pick swaps, and everyone's happy, right? Denny Avila is on the best contract in the league, $15 million next 4 years. Goes down to 11-3. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. Denny Avila was the best Wizard all year. Says Jordan Poole's last splash in March, in March. So when it comes down to it, lowering marketing, if the Utah Jazz are desperate for a starting center and John Collins is in it and Walker Kessler is in it, is it Alex Sarr, who's only played center his whole life, is not a power forward? Shout out to you, NBA big board and Tankathon. They need to get it right. He's never played power forward before, and he won't play power forward next to Wemby. So if he wants to be a Utah Jazz and they're trying to tank again, honestly, for Cooper Flag, maybe that's a great pick for them. Will they trade this Lauri Markkanen for Keldon Johnson, 3 picks, and Devontae Graham? I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? So at the end of the day, the restricted free agent class of like a Patrick Williams, who else is out there, man? It really is bad, like you were saying. It's not the best. Cedi Osman might be re-signed. He's a guy that's just a perfect Spurs guy, a master of none, but just can do a little bit of all when it comes down to it. That's just so I was getting called. That's just what a lot of people, a lot of Spurs fans have been looking for. Someone that can play multiple positions. Cedi Osman, when the James Sohan experiment was done, Cedi Osman actually was the lead initiator and ball handler for the Spurs before Trey Jones started in January after a couple of injuries. So yeah, if they can find a lot of guys that can be just comfortable with the ball in their hands, play their position, play it well. They definitely need more 3-and-D guys, 3-and-D wings, and a point guard is on the way. There's no way they're not addressing that. Trey Jones is probably going to be the backup because he's the insurance policy that you have that can play starter level minutes. Because say someone's hurt, that Trey Jones is going to turn the ball over more than two times, and he can maybe knock down maybe 1 or 2 threes. And if he's left open, they sag off like how they were stupidly doing in February and March. He can knock down 4 or 5 threes a game, surprisingly every now and then. So yeah, that's really all I got in terms of free agents and trades. But it really comes all down to those picks, man. And I know that a lot of we're talking about the Toronto pick conveying this year. It really holds more power if it conveys next year. Next year's class, there will be 8, 9 guys that would be not a solidified number 1 pick in this class, but they'll be in the mix for it, no doubt, no question. So that's definitely how much stronger next year's class is. So yeah, that's all I got today. Appreciate it.
And I definitely think there's value when you have a player like Wembanyama to waiting till the right guy comes, because you have, I think, at least a decent amount of confidence that the players are going to want to play with him. He's someone that's very intriguing, and every single probably star player is thinking, man, if I got that dude on my team, I got a good shot to win it. So I think that it is something to think about. One name that kind of stood out to me as far as free agency, and he would have to opt out, would be a D'Angelo Russell. That would limit you in the long term for sure. I think fit wise, he's someone to play on or off ball with Victor. So the fit seems to be like something that could work. Chris, did you have any names you want to add to that free agency list?
I was just gonna say Russell. That's exactly.
I stole it. My bad.
No, you're good. That's exactly what I was gonna say. I mean, he's going. I think he's got an opt out this year. I'm sure he's going to. He's popped off the second half of the season. Harden's a free agent. Lowry's a free agent. Trey and DeJounte are 2 guys who, with trades, I think would be good targets for them. It's just about, I think with Wembanyama, with a generational player like this, you just don't want to hurt him in any way. You got tons of time. He's so young. He's already ready, and you don't want to discount that. But you also don't have to rush into this with someone who maybe isn't the best possible fit. And I think that's really the needle they need to thread in San Antonio. Trey would be a fantastically fun fit next to Wembanyama, but do you want to hamper a generational defensive player with a generationally bad defensive player? Is that really the best plan, even if it's a really fun, awesome fit on offense? And so I think it's, for the Spurs, it'll be about not rushing into anything that is not the correct fit, because you do have time to go find someone. You have time and assets to go find someone that maybe fits better if you feel like they do. Maybe it's Donovan Mitchell in here. I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that I think the Spurs really need to be targeting.
And I think to that point, Chris, I don't think the Spurs are at the point where you kind of go through these phases where it's like you're looking for fit or you're looking for talent. I still think the Spurs are firmly in the talent phase of this. Just acquire whoever. If it's a Donovan Clingan, if it's a Stephon Castle, if it's a Richer, these are guys that you're going to get shots at 2 or 3, maybe more. I say that probably 1 more lottery pick somewhere along the way, but not too many more. But I still think like, hey, when you have a player this talented, people are going to want to come play with him. People are going to they're going to line up to say, man, there's a championship opportunity in 2-3 years. So at this point, just grab whomever. I know the whole point of the podcast was talking about point guards, but just grab whoever the Spurs have at the top of their board and then just figure out how to make it all fit together. Even if it is a guy like, if it, Evans had Klingon, like maybe that's the guy. Maybe, it seems contradictory on paper, but maybe if you're looking for the best talent, I don't think it's out of the question that he's the number 1 overall pick. And so that's kind of where I agree with you is like, if it's not a point guard today, fine. There's a point guard somewhere. We're not winning a championship next year. So let's just grab whoever we can grab and continue to build around, as we have said, Wembanyama, Vassell, and whatever.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Alex, I'll kick it right back to you for your pick right now. You're locked into it for the rest of the draft season. No take backsies. All right. Who should the Spurs draft if they're going to go with a guard in the draft?
Castle. I lose zero sleep over this. Like, lock it in, lock it down. Let's go.
All right, Chris.
I think I do agree with Castle. I like some of these other guys. I think for other teams better, but Castle for this team, I like doubling down on the defense and not hamper. Even if he doesn't turn out to be a real high level advantage creator, I do think that he's probably the best fit for this Spurs team.
And Evan, who's your pick for the best fit?
The best fit is Stephon Castle, but I don't want to say I've changed in the last 20 minutes, but this is a gut feeling. I really do feel if they're in position that they would take Rob Dillingham. I really do feel that. It's just what my gut is saying. It's not the clutch ties. It's not all we mentioned with the interview, but I really do feel that Rob is going to be high on their list if he tests well and if he has a great combine.
And I hate to be a victim of groupthink here, but I think Castle right now is who I'm leaning towards. I think Shepherd you can make an argument for as far as versatility on and off ball, future fit with other possible pieces, but Castle I think is probably the guy I'm looking at as well. So thank you for coming out to our first episode of the Ahead of the Game podcast. Make sure you like the page, like the video, subscribe, and share the video out so we can get some eyes on this and make some more good content for y'all. Thank you and have an excellent day.